If you want to learn how to fish for pre-spawn bass, this is the time to do it. Here are my favorite techniques right here. So it's that time of year, things are starting to warm up, and that also means the water's starting to warm up and the fish are starting to get on the move. And what I mean by that is it's pre-spawn time. The fish are headed to the spawning grounds, and as the weather warms, more fish are going to start to move up out of the deep and get into those positions and get ready for spawning. And it couldn't be a better time to catch a lot of fish, and definitely it's the best time of the year to catch the biggest fish of the year. Why? Because they've been fattening up all winter, plus they're full of eggs for the spawn, and it's just a great time. These fish are coming up out of the deep, they're hungry, and they're thinking about eating before they get up on those beds and spawn. Every day the fishing's changing, and if you're not having a lot of success, keep at it. So if you see here on the deck, I've got 4 different rods rigged up with 4 different baits, and all these are baits that I don't care where I'm going out in the country, I'm gonna have these 4 baits tied up on my deck of my boat, just because they're great baits, they're great search baits to find fish, and they'll catch numbers of fish and big fish no matter where you go in the country. And the other thing that they all kind of have in the common factor too is they're all basically shallow water baits. The water's starting to warm up, the weather's warming up, and the fish are starting to move up. And it brings to mind that, you know, it's that time of year where you've got to put a bait in your hand and cover water. You need to start looking for places where fish are headed. Obviously, fish are headed to places to spawn. And if you know over the years, hey, in April or May, this is where fish are spawned, back out from there and start looking from there. Where would these fish start to stage? But I can tell you the #1 key, especially early, is water temperature. This is the most important time of the year to be looking on your electronics and paying attention to water temperature, because you might have 2 creeks or 2 coves on a lake that are side by side, and one might be 2, 3, 4, even 5 degrees warmer than the one right next to it. And sometimes that can be the whole difference between that cove having some fish pulled up in it to where the other one doesn't. The other is bait. With that being said, search baits are the key. Here's one of the things that I think it took me a lot of time to realize, but I like to go to the back of a cove or a creek to start with. So if I've got a big cove, a lot of times I may run to the back of it. If I can't catch a fish or 2 out of the back of it, one, it tells me to look at the water temperature, but if I catch a few back there, then I'll start to expand and fish down the sides. Or the other thing to do is start on the main lake points of it, because typically if that cove's holding a lot of fish, there's gonna be some fish holding on those main lake points as well. So how do you approach that? These baits right here. I may get out and start out in 15, 20 foot of water and start throwing a jerk bait around, scan around with my forward facing sonar. There you might have standing timber, you might have vegetation, something like that, and those fish will suspend out off of those points, but then they'll start to pull up and get onto those points, and that's where the lipless crankbait really comes into play. Get up there in the shallower, that 6, 8 foot of water or less up on the points themselves. You can fan cast a lipless crankbait around the point itself, cover it fast, and that's what's key too, is fishing fast. And then the square bill, you can't go wrong. A lot of times you fish it in the same areas as you would a lipless crankbait. I think probably the biggest thing between these two that come to mind is I really like a lipless crankbait around aquatic vegetation, around hydrilla, milfoil, something like that, where if I'm more around rock, that's where I'm going to prefer the square bill as well. So last but not least, my favorite by far is a bladed jig. I'll fish it in about anywhere. I'll fish any of these, and that's kind of my go-to. But if I pull up on a point, catch a few fish, then I may analyze the shoreline. And what you want to start doing is looking at the mapping on your GPS or your phone or whatever, or even an old school paper map. If the lake sets up properly for it, here in Texas it's a big deal, is a lot of our creeks here, they have winding channels that go through these coves, and the fish use those channels as like a highway. It's really crazy how they use it. They'll follow it, and then you may get into a turn where it's got some deeper water, and that's an area where fish will stage. They'll set up there, and then it may warm up, and they'll move back into the creek a little bit farther, and then there might be a secondary point. Some of those fish may pull up to that secondary point, and ultimately Some of them, it seems like they use that creek channel, go all the way to the back of the creek, but wherever that creek channel gets back to the back, those are the areas to focus on. So as it's early in the pre-spawn, pay attention to where those creek channels, how they meander through, or the little bit steeper banks. But then as the pre-spawn progresses, that's where it gets easier. It seems like more and more fish come and they just start getting around everything that looks good. And if you find the best coves of all, it seems like there'll be certain days where everywhere you think there should be a fish, there is a fish. If you go through a cove, and let's say you may catch a couple fish off this little secondary point, might have a little brush pile or dock here you might catch a couple fish off of, and you make a pass through that cove, don't hesitate to turn right back around and make another pass, because typically you'll have a few fish that pull up on a spot, you catch them, those fish are up there feeding or moving up for the conditions, but then they pull off and you get new fish continually coming. So that's what makes this time of year so rewarding. But the thing to remember too are those same places, that's where some of your biggest bass of the year are going to be, is pulling up to those places. They're fattening up before they move up on the bed. So great time of year to fish, and great time of year to catch a lot of numbers, have a lot of fun. So get out there and give it a try.